When entitlement meets stupidity, the results can be absolutely fatal. These are the shocking stories of women whose arrogance, ignorance, and refusal to listen to reason led them straight into the most preventable deaths imaginable. It was November 15, 2015, at the King of Prussia Mall in Pennsylvania. A main escalator between the first and second floors had been shut down since morning due to a mechanical failure in the step drive system, with interlocking safety barricades and warning signs positioned across both entrances to block access for shoppers. Maintenance crews were operating the escalator in inspection mode when a diagnostic condition left the step drive stopped while the handrail moved briefly during testing, a rare mismatch investigators later described as a temporary safety hazard. A security guard directed shoppers toward the elevator and side staircase as maintenance personnel worked nearby. Lindley Priff, a 39-year-old lifestyle blogger, entered the mall wearing 4-inch stiletto heels and carrying 6 shopping bags from various stores. Security later noted she appeared unsteady on her feet, and toxicology would later confirm alcohol in her system. She continued filming content for her social media accounts as she moved through the mall, documenting luxury shopping experiences. Her afternoon had been dedicated to filming herself in different locations throughout the mall for her online followers. The broken escalator presented an obstacle to her planned route. The metal steps sat motionless while the rubber handrail continued its upward movement, creating a dangerous mismatch that maintenance crews were attempting to repair. The security guard was directing foot traffic away from the hazardous equipment when Lindley approached, demanding to know why she couldn't use the escalator. When informed that the escalator was experiencing a partial mechanical failure and was potentially dangerous, Lindley became agitated. She complained that her high heels made the regular stairs difficult and that waiting for elevators was inconvenient. The guard explained the safety concerns and pointed toward alternative routes, but Lindley dismissed these warnings as unnecessary restrictions. The guard momentarily turned her attention to assist an elderly customer who needed directions. During this brief window, Lindley ducked under the caution tape and stepped onto the motionless escalator. Her stiletto heels immediately made contact with the metal step edges, which provided no stability for narrow heel points. She lost her balance within seconds. Instinctively, she reached for the rubber handrail, which was still moving upward despite the steps being stationary. This created a pulling force that dragged her forward while her feet remained planted, causing her body to twist unnaturally. Her right stiletto heel caught against the edge of a step cleat as the moving handrail continued pulling her upper body forward. The heel snapped off completely while her ankle twisted violently. She fell face first down the motionless steps, her shopping bags scattering as she tumbled. The metal edges of each step struck her head and body as she fell approximately 20 feet down the escalator. Her momentum carried her to the bottom, where her head struck the metal comb plate, resulting in severe cranial trauma later confirmed by the medical examiner. Shoppers in the area immediately began screaming and calling for help. The security guard ran over and found Lindley unconscious with severe head trauma, blood flowing from her ears and nose. She called emergency services while attempting to provide basic first aid. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes and found Lindley unresponsive with no spontaneous respiration and fixed, dilated pupils. She was transported to the hospital but was pronounced dead at 3:45 p.m. from multiple skull fractures and traumatic brain injury. The medical examiner determined that the combination of falling down the metal steps and the final impact with the comb plate had caused unsurvivable damage. Mall security footage clearly showed Lindley had deliberately bypassed all safety barriers and warnings. The escalator had been properly marked as out of service due to the dangerous partial mechanical failure. The mall's insurance company determined she was entirely at fault for ignoring safety measures. Investigators recovered Lindley's phone from the scene, which had been recording when she bypassed the safety barriers. The recording documented her bypassing the posted safety barriers moments before stepping onto the disabled escalator. At her family's request, this footage was never released to the public. But Lindley wasn't the only victim whose dismissal of expert warnings led to a preventable death. In a quiet Marietta neighborhood, A corporate director was about to learn that pride can be the most dangerous tool of all. It was September 23, 2017, in Marietta, Georgia, where a 40-foot oak tree towered over a quiet suburban driveway. Several thick branches, some 8 to 10 inches wide, extended over a parked luxury sedan, casting heavy shadows across the concrete below. Tamara Skell, a 50-year-old corporate human resources director, decided to remove the overhanging branches herself after receiving a $1,200 quote. Outraged at what she called a scam price, she posted in a neighborhood social media group complaining that tree companies preyed on homeowners. She insisted anyone with common sense could handle the job. That morning, she bought a chainsaw and extension ladder, confident that internet research and her management background were enough preparation. The branches she planned to cut weighed several hundred pounds each, suspended 15 feet above the ground. Her neighbor, a retired construction worker in his late 60s, approached as Tamara set up her 16-foot aluminum ladder against the trunk. He warned her about cutting large branches without proper equipment, explaining how weight distribution could cause unpredictable falls. Tamara reacted with irritation, accusing him of trying to intimidate her and implying he relied on outdated methods. She told him she didn't need unsolicited advice and suggested he focus on his own property. When he noted the branch extended near the shared property line, she threatened to report him to the Homeowners Association for harassment. She phoned the HOA president to document that she was performing routine maintenance and claimed her neighbor was interfering out of jealousy over her vehicle. She seemed more intent on proving she was right than reconsidering the risk. She wore sandals, shorts, and a tank top with no safety equipment, dismissing store recommendations as upselling tactics. The ladder was positioned directly beneath the branch, placing her in the path of falling wood. Professional arborists would have cut the limb in sections using ropes, but Tamara planned a single cut through the entire branch. The chainsaw started easily as she balanced 12 feet up the ladder. She began cutting the 9-inch diameter branch without making a relief undercut, unaware the weight could cause it to split and tear free unpredictably. The limb extended over her vehicle, which she hoped to protect by removing the wood herself. After she cut about 60% through, loud popping sounds signaled the fibers were failing under the weight. As the wood sagged, the chainsaw blade began binding inside the cut, but she kept cutting as the heavy oak limb neared its breaking point. Witnesses later said the chainsaw's noise likely masked the sound of fibers splitting. The branch suddenly broke free with a sharp crack, pivoting downward toward her position as the remaining fibers gave way. She looked up just in time to see the wood descending, but had no chance to move. It struck her across the chest and head with significant force. The impact caused severe chest trauma and knocked her backward off the ladder. She fell 12 feet onto the concrete driveway, striking her head as the heavy branch landed on her body. The combined impacts caused multiple skull fractures and massive internal injuries. The neighbor who had warned her called emergency services and tried to move the branch, but couldn't shift it. She was unconscious with severe head trauma and multiple critical injuries as emergency services arrived. Her breathing was labored and irregular. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes and used hydraulic tools to lift the branch. Paramedics identified critical internal injuries and traumatic brain trauma during their assessment. Despite rapid intervention, her injuries were unsurvivable. She was transported to a regional trauma center but was pronounced dead at 1:17 p.m. from multiple blunt force trauma injuries. The attending physician explained the combination of the branch impact and the fall caused damage incompatible with life. The fire department's safety inspector later stated proper tree removal required cutting branches in sections and controlling their descent with ropes. Tamara's approach was extremely dangerous and inconsistent with professional safety practices. Her luxury vehicle was also destroyed, and insurance denied the claim after determining the damage resulted from unsafe tree removal practices. Tamara wasn't the only person whose refusal to back down turned fatal. Just over a year earlier in Arizona, Another woman's need to prove she was right about something far more trivial would end just as tragically, driven by the same stubborn pride. It was July 14, 2016, when the Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Scottsdale, turning the asphalt into waves of shimmering heat. The temperature had climbed to 112 degrees by early afternoon, the kind of oppressive heat that made breathing feel like inhaling from an oven. The Costco parking lot was packed beyond capacity, cars circling endlessly as weekend shoppers took advantage of summer sales. Brella Tusk, a 47-year-old woman who worked in property sales, pulled her white luxury SUV into the lot just after 2 in the afternoon. She wore a pink velour tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, having spent her morning in heated discussions with her neighborhood association. She spotted a family loading groceries into their sedan near the entrance. Brella immediately stopped her vehicle perpendicular to the space, blocking the lane with her turn signal flashing. From the opposite direction, a younger woman in a compact car approached the same spot. Brella laid on her horn as the family continued their loading, visibly uncomfortable with the attention. When the sedan finally pulled out, the compact car quickly maneuvered into the space. Brella threw her SUV into park in the middle of the traffic lane, engine still running, and stepped out into the scorching heat. She approached the other vehicle with her phone raised, filming as she confronted the driver, who remained inside with the doors locked. Behind her, abandoned SUV, traffic began backing up as several cars waited in the lane. For 3 minutes, she stood in the direct sunlight as shoppers began recording the confrontation. Then, she returned to her vehicle, declaring her intention to wait as long as necessary. Her SUV sat with the engine running and the driver's door wide open, air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the extreme heat pouring through the opening. The temperature outside had climbed to 114 degrees. Despite the running air conditioning, the open door provided little relief, as hot air and reflected heat from the asphalt continued flooding the interior. The sun beat directly through the windshield and open door, radiating heat into the cabin like a furnace. She sat periodically revving the engine and honking, while the other driver had gone inside to shop. 47 minutes into her vigil, the engine temperature gauge began climbing into the red zone. The relentless idling and triple-digit heat, combined with prolonged air conditioning use, pushed the cooling system beyond its limits. As temperatures climbed, the vehicle automatically shut off the air conditioning compressor to protect the engine. Minutes later, the overheating forced the engine to stall. With the engine silent, radiant heat from the sun and asphalt quickly overwhelmed the cabin. Brella remained seated, her phone now recording a video as she documented her complaint. Her face grew increasingly flushed as sweat soaked through her velour tracksuit. A teenage employee collecting carts noticed her vehicle still parked in the lane 15 minutes later. He saw her through the windshield, gesturing at her phone, her face noticeably red. 5 minutes later, a couple observed her slumped slightly to one side. The woman suggested checking on her, but her husband noted the door was open. As time passed after the engine failure, another shopper noticed her hands had stopped moving and her condition appeared to be worsening. 28 minutes after the engine failed, she collapsed forward against the steering wheel. The sustained horn blast drew a crowd. They found her unresponsive, her skin flushed and overheated. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They found her pulseless and in cardiac arrest. Despite immediate cooling measures and advanced life support, her body showed no response. She was pronounced dead at 3:52 that afternoon. The medical examiner determined the cause as severe heat stroke with multiple organ failure. The other driver provided security footage to authorities. The evidence showed Brella had chosen to remain in the vehicle even after the engine failed. No charges were filed. Investigators recovered Brella's phone from the vehicle. It contained a 22-minute video she had recorded, the footage showing her becoming progressively more flushed and disoriented before the phone dropped. The audio captured her final labored breathing. Her family requested the footage never be released publicly. We've got more shocking, unbelievable tragedies coming up. So hit that subscribe button if you want to see how reckless outbursts and bad decisions can turn deadly in seconds. It was June 18, 2017, in Plano, Texas, where the morning sun reflected off the crystal-clear water of the community swimming pool. The temperature was climbing toward 85 degrees with high humidity, creating perfect conditions for swimmers seeking relief from the Texas heat. The pool area was quiet at 11:30 a.m., with only a few early swimmers enjoying the calm before the afternoon rush. Candace Gloat, a 52-year-old woman who worked in pharmaceutical sales, arrived carrying a small testing kit she had purchased online. She had spent the previous 3 weeks filing complaints with the Homeowners Association about water quality. Despite the pool passing all required health inspections, Candace had convinced herself that the chemical levels were dangerously inadequate. The pool maintenance worker, a certified technician with 8 years of experience, was performing his routine morning chemical balancing when Candace approached. She immediately began testing the water with cheap test strips, announcing loudly that the chlorine levels were too low and unsafe. The worker explained that he had just added the proper chemicals, but Candace dismissed his expertise entirely. She pulled out her phone and began recording, claiming the worker was ignoring unsafe chemical levels, demanding that more chemicals be added immediately. The worker tried to explain the dangers of improper chemical mixing, but Candace had already decided she knew better. The maintenance cart sat nearby outside the equipment room, its door temporarily propped open while the technician balanced chemicals. Inside were a 50-pound bucket of calcium hypochlorite granules and a plastic jug of muriatic acid. The chemicals were intended to be stored and handled separately. Investigators later noted that combining them created a rapid chlorine gas release. Candace grabbed the heavy bucket, declaring her intention to fix the problem herself. The worker immediately shouted warnings, but she had already pushed past him into the small equipment room where the pool's filtration system hummed. The room was only 8 feet by 10 feet, with a single ventilation fan. She set the bucket down and noticed the jug of muriatic acid on the shelf. Investigators later recovered recent phone searches related to pool pH balancing, suggesting she believed the water required both chlorine and acid adjustment at the same time. The worker frantically tried to stop her, but Candace ignored him completely. She poured several cups of muriatic acid directly into the bucket of calcium hypochlorite granules. The reaction was immediate. The mixture began to hiss and heat rapidly, releasing a harsh, yellow-green chlorine vapor that filled the small enclosed room within seconds. Candace gasped reflexively in surprise, pulling the chlorine vapor deep into her lungs. The chlorine vapor immediately irritated her airways, triggering violent coughing and burning in her lungs as she stumbled toward the door, but her eyes were burning so severely she couldn't see. The pool worker grabbed her and pulled her from the equipment room, immediately calling emergency services. He tried to keep her upright and breathing fresh air, but Candace was gasping and wheezing. Her coughing worsened, and she struggled to speak between breaths as responders noticed her oxygen levels dropping. Within minutes, pink-tinged foam appeared at her mouth, indicating severe fluid buildup in her lungs. Residual chlorine vapor continued venting from the equipment room, forcing evacuation of the pool deck until hazmat crews arrived. 3 swimmers experienced coughing and eye irritation from brief exposure. Paramedics arrived within 5 minutes and found Candace in severe respiratory distress with cyanotic lips, indicating oxygen deprivation. Paramedics noted severe respiratory distress consistent with chlorine inhalation as fluid rapidly began filling her lungs. Despite receiving emergency respiratory support, her damaged lungs could not exchange oxygen. She was airlifted to the regional medical center and placed on mechanical ventilation, but the extent of her lung damage was irreversible. She died 4 hours later from respiratory failure caused by acute chlorine gas poisoning. The pool area was sealed off, while hazmat teams spent 2 days ventilating the equipment room. Security footage confirmed that Candace had ignored all safety warnings and created the lethal gas cloud, despite repeated attempts to stop her. The toxic fumes that claimed Candace's life in Texas were just the beginning of a deadly pattern. 9 months later, and 900 miles west, another tragedy was unfolding. One where a simple weekend project would expose the fatal cost of dismissing professional expertise. It was April 7, 2018, in Phoenix, Arizona, where the spring morning brought clear skies and temperatures in the comfortable mid-70s. The home improvement store opened its doors to weekend customers seeking supplies for various projects. In the electrical department, fluorescent lights illuminated rows of wiring, outlets, and tools, while safety pamphlets sat near the checkout counter. Shara Vunt, a 44-year-old insurance claims adjuster, entered wearing flip-flops and a sundress, carrying printouts from renovation websites. After receiving an $800 quote from a licensed electrician to rewire her kitchen outlets, she chose to handle the project herself, convinced that online tutorials had given her sufficient expertise. Before reaching the electrical aisle, she stopped at customer service to argue about the price of contractor-grade wire. She insisted an online listing should be honored in store, despite it being from a third-party seller. When the clerk explained the policy, Shara reacted with visible irritation, loudly criticizing the store's pricing and competence. Several customers turned to watch as she continued voicing her dissatisfaction. In the electrical department, a licensed electrician with over 20 years of experience attempted to explain the risks of working on energized residential circuits. Shara repeatedly interrupted him, correcting terminology and minimizing the complexity of the task. When he mentioned permits and professional installation requirements for energized residential circuits and 240-volt appliances, she dismissed the warning and implied he was exaggerating dangers to protect his trade. Her tone grew confrontational, and she suggested that safety concerns were merely tactics to discourage independent customers. The employee demonstrated how to use a voltage tester and emphasized that confirming a circuit was de-energized was standard safety practice. Shara declined the full explanation, purchased the device without opening it, and refused recommendations for insulated gloves and proper footwear, viewing them as unnecessary expenses. At checkout, she disputed an expired coupon and threatened to leave a negative review about staff professionalism. She eventually completed the purchase, visibly annoyed. By early afternoon, Shara returned home and began working in her garage, where the electrical panel controlled power to her kitchen. The concrete floor was damp from washing her car earlier, and a garden hose lay nearby. She wore the same flip-flops, their soles wet from the moisture on the floor. She located what she believed was the main breaker and switched it off, but it only disabled a secondary panel. The main 240-volt lines remained energized, carrying enough current to cause cardiac arrest. The voltage tester remained unopened on her workbench. She decided verifying the circuit would only slow her progress. Using old pliers with worn metal handles, Shara began stripping insulation from what she assumed was dead wire. The moment the metal touched the live 240-volt conductor, electrical current found a path through her body. Her wet flip-flops on damp concrete created an efficient ground connection, allowing current to pass from her hands through her torso to her feet, disrupting her heart's electrical rhythm. The shock caused her muscles to contract violently, preventing her from letting go of the pliers. Within seconds, her heart entered ventricular fibrillation as electricity disrupted its rhythm. Her diaphragm seized, stopping her breathing. Sustained contact caused severe burns at the entry and exit points before the circuit finally broke. Shara's neighbor discovered her body 3 hours later when she came to borrow a ladder. Shara was still gripping the pliers, with electrical burns visible on her hands and feet. Emergency services were called immediately. The fire department's electrical inspector determined she had been electrocuted by 240 volts while working on live wires. Investigators noted the circuit she contacted was not protected by a GFCI breaker, a factor that allowed the electrical current to continue uninterrupted. The voltage tester that could have confirmed the circuit was safe was still sealed in its packaging. The main breaker had never been turned off. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental electrocution, noting that wet conditions, metal tools, and energized household wiring had created a predictably fatal situation. Investigators concluded the energized circuit and wet conditions created a lethal combination. The homeowner's insurance claim was denied after investigators determined the damage resulted from unpermitted electrical work, leaving the family responsible for repairs. The house required complete rewiring before it could be sold. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.